Mercedes could lose everything before the 2026 season even begins. After pre-season testing ended, the FIA called an emergency vote that could strip away what insiders believe is a hidden 10 to 15 horsepower advantage. We are talking about up to 4/10 per lap. Over a season, that is the difference between fighting and dominating. Rival manufacturers have formally accused Mercedes of exploiting a compression ratio loophole that only appears when the engine is hot. Cold, it looks legal. At race temperature, it could be something very different. Now the FIA is preparing a decisive vote that may introduce a mandatory hot test at 130 degrees Celsius. If that passes, Mercedes might be forced to redesign their engine mid-season. No retroactive punishment, but a potential performance collapse right when the championship battle explodes. And here is the part nobody is saying out loud. If Mercedes fail that new test, they do not just lose power. They lose credibility. They lose momentum. They lose control of the next engine era. This vote could redefine Formula One's balance of power before the first real title fight even begins. Subscribe now, because what happens next could change the sport for years. Pre-season testing is over. The cars are back in the factories. The data has been analyzed. And on the surface, everything looks normal. But inside the paddock, the tone has completely changed. Because what happened in Bahrain was not just another reliability issue. It was a trigger. During testing, a serious Mercedes power unit failure forced the FIA to step in and inspect the engine in detail. That alone raised eyebrows. Not because engines never fail. They do. But because, at the same time, rival manufacturers were already preparing formal complaints about Mercedes' 2026 concept. This was not random. It was coordinated. And that is where things start to feel uncomfortable. Here is what makes this explosive. The 2026 regulations reduce the maximum compression ratio from 18:1 down to 16:1. On paper, that is straightforward. Lower compression, lower peak combustion pressure, a more controlled, efficient, sustainable engine philosophy. But regulations are not just about numbers. They are about interpretation. Right now, the FIA measures compression ratio when the engine is cold, ambient temperature, static conditions, no race heat, no extreme pressure. No real operating stress. And that is the crack in the door. Multiple teams believe Mercedes designed their combustion chamber and piston geometry to behave differently once the engine reaches full race temperature. Cold, it reads exactly 16:1. Perfectly legal. But as materials expand under heat, as internal components shift by microscopic tolerances, the effective compression ratio may increase. 17:1. Maybe even closer to 18:1. And that difference is not theoretical. It could mean 10 to 15 extra horsepower. On long straights, that is massive. On high-speed circuits like Monza or Silverstone, that is decisive. 3 to 4/10 per lap. Every lap. But here is the deeper layer most casual fans are missing. If Mercedes found a way to legally design around the cold test, then they did not break the rules. They mastered them. And that forces the FIA into a dangerous position. Do they protect the wording of the regulation? Or do they protect the spirit of it? Because if one manufacturer unlocks a hidden advantage at the start of a brand new engine era, the competitive gap could last years. We saw it in the hybrid era before. And no rival wants history to repeat itself. That is why this vote is not just technical. It is strategic. It is political. It is about preventing a potential long-term dominance cycle before it even begins. And here is where the tension escalates. The proposal on the table is simple in concept. Introduce a second compression test. A hot test. Conducted at approximately 130 degrees Celsius. Realistic operating conditions. If the engine exceeds 16:1 in that state, it fails. Sounds fair. But timing changes everything. Because if this rule is approved mid-season, Mercedes could start legally, win races legally, build a championship lead legally, and then suddenly be forced to detune or redesign. That is not a minor adjustment. That is a structural shock. To performance, to reliability, to momentum. And we have not even reached the most sensitive part yet. Because if the FIA pushes this through with a supermajority vote, 4 out of 5 manufacturers, plus the governing body, plus Formula One management, then it sends a message. A message that the paddock believes something is there. And if that message becomes reality, Mercedes are not just facing a technical revision. They are facing the possibility that their entire 2026 concept was built around a measurement loophole that is about to disappear. And if that foundation shifts, everything shifts with it. But this story goes deeper than just horsepower. Because if this hot test becomes official, the consequences are not linear. They are layered. Technical, political, psychological. Let's break it down carefully. If the new hot test is approved, it is expected to come into force around the summer break of 2026. Not at the beginning of the season. Not retroactively. Which means Mercedes would be fully legal under the current cold test procedure when the championship starts. And that detail matters, because it creates a split-season scenario. Imagine this. Mercedes begin the year strong. Their power unit delivers exceptional straight-line speed. Customer teams like McLaren and Williams benefit as well. Momentum builds. Confidence grows. The narrative becomes clear. Mercedes nailed the new era. But then summer arrives. The hot test becomes mandatory. The engine is measured at 130 degrees Celsius. Real operating temperature. Real expansion. Real stress. And if the effective compression ratio climbs above 16:1, that specific specification can no longer be homologated. Now here is the key point most people misunderstand. This is not automatically a sporting penalty. It is an eligibility problem. If it fails, the engine simply cannot be used in that configuration anymore. Mercedes would have to modify it. Redesign piston geometry. Adjust combustion chamber volumes. Potentially remove any thermal expansion advantage. And that means losing performance. And losing performance mid-season is brutal. Because you do not just lose power. You destabilize everything. Cooling maps. Ignition timing. Energy deployment strategy. Reliability margins. All of it is interconnected. But here is where the tension becomes existential. The 2026 engine regulations are heavily restricted. The internal combustion engine is largely frozen after homologation. Development windows are limited. Additional upgrade opportunities are only granted to manufacturers who are significantly behind in performance. 2 to 4% down. Or more. If Mercedes are leading, they do not qualify for that flexibility. Which means they cannot simply redesign freely. They would have to use limited tokens. Or negotiate politically. Or accept a reduction in competitiveness. Now think about the psychology inside the paddock. Ferrari does not want to start a new cycle already chasing. Red Bull powertrains cannot afford to begin their first full in-house era at a deficit. Honda, returning in a major way, wants parity. Audi, entering the sport, cannot be 4/10ths behind on day one. So the pressure on the FIA is immense. Because if this loophole exists, and if it is not closed immediately, we risk repeating what happened in the early hybrid era. One manufacturer finding an interpretation advantage, and building a dominance cycle that lasts years. That is why this vote is so sensitive. It requires a supermajority. 4 out of 5 manufacturers. Plus the FIA. Plus Formula One management. If one manufacturer votes against it, it becomes political warfare. And here is something even more serious. If the FIA formally clarifies that the 16:1 limit must apply at all times while the car is running, and if a protest proves that a Mercedes-powered car exceeds that ratio on track, then we move into the hard scenario. Disqualification from the event. Loss of constructor points. Loss of driver points. Immediate withdrawal of that engine specification. Not retroactively for earlier races, but from that moment forward. And imagine the championship context. Imagine a title fight separated by single digits. Imagine a protest being lodged after a race win. Imagine the technical report confirming compression above the limit at race temperature. The consequences would be explosive. Toto Wolff has publicly said they will adapt if the rules change. But adapting under pressure is different from adapting in development. When your architecture is already locked. When your concept is already optimized around a specific measurement protocol. Changing that mid-season is not a tweak. It is surgery. And here is the uncomfortable truth. If Mercedes built their advantage purely around thermal behavior, then the hot test removes the foundation of that advantage. If they did not, then they pass the test and silence everyone. But until that vote happens, every performance simulation, every straight-line speed number, every dyno rumor, comes with an asterisk. Because this is not just about who built the strongest engine. It is about who built the smartest interpretation of the rulebook. And whether that interpretation survives contact with political reality. The collapse people are talking about is not visible yet. There is no slow car. No public scandal. No penalty. Just uncertainty. And in Formula One, uncertainty is often the most dangerous force of all. Now let's go into the scenario nobody inside Mercedes wants to talk about publicly. What happens if the hot test is approved, and they fail it? Because there are levels to this. And each level gets more serious. First level. The new specification is about to be introduced after summer. Mercedes submits their updated engine for homologation under the new hot protocol. It exceeds 16-to-1 at operating temperature. The FIA does not approve it. No dramatic headlines. No public disqualification. But that version of the engine simply cannot race. They are forced to stay with an older, safer specification. Less aggressive. Less powerful. And in Formula One, half a step back is a full step behind. Second level. The FIA clarifies in writing that the compression limit must be respected at all times while the car is running on track. Not just in static testing. In real conditions. Now imagine a rival team files a protest after a race. The engine is examined. Measured under race temperature simulation. And the data shows compression beyond 16-to-1. That is no longer a gray area. That becomes a technical infringement. And technical infringements in Formula One are unforgiving. Disqualification from that event. Loss of points. Public scrutiny. Reputational damage. Third level. The political solution. A compromise. Allow Mercedes to compete through 2026 under the current interpretation. But impose a mandatory redesign deadline for 2027. No immediate collapse. But a ticking clock. A forced convergence. And here is why that third scenario might actually be the most dangerous. Because it confirms to the entire paddock that Mercedes found something real. Something powerful enough to trigger rule clarification. Something that required collective action to neutralize. But here is the detail that changes the emotional weight of this entire story. Mercedes is not alone. McLaren, Williams, potentially Alpine depending on supply structures. All depend on that power unit. If performance drops mid-season, it is not just one team affected. It is multiple championship campaigns destabilized at once. Imagine McLaren fighting for wins. Imagine Williams rebuilding momentum. And suddenly, all of them are forced to recalibrate because of a regulatory shift triggered by a compression measurement. That creates alliances. And enemies. Now let's talk about engineering reality. If the suspected mechanism involves thermal expansion, three-dimensional printed pistons, special alloy behavior, micro-cavities connected to pre-chambers, then redesigning is not simple. It means recalculating combustion stability, flame propagation, knock resistance, fuel efficiency targets. And remember, 2026 engines rely heavily on electrical deployment balance. The internal combustion engine is only part of the total output. If you reduce compression to stay safe, you may need to push electrical systems harder. That affects battery management, cooling, reliability over race distance. This is not removing a trick. This is altering the entire performance ecosystem of the car. And here is the psychological dimension. If Mercedes built their concept around maximizing the exact limits of the cold test, then the engineers know precisely how close they are running to the edge. If the hot test forces them to back away from that edge, they lose not only power, they lose confidence in the architecture they committed to. And in Formula One, confidence in your concept is everything. When you doubt the foundation, every development decision becomes reactive instead of aggressive. But here is the twist most people are not considering. What if Mercedes passes the hot test comfortably? What if the expansion theory is exaggerated? What if the vote happens, the measurement changes, and nothing dramatic occurs? Then Mercedes emerges stronger than ever. Because they would have survived political pressure, technical investigation, and rival suspicion. And proven their dominance is pure engineering superiority. That outcome would silence the entire paddock. It would validate their approach. It would redefine the narrative. So this moment, right now, is suspended between two futures. One where Mercedes engineered brilliance within the rules. And one where they engineered brilliance around a measurement loophole that is about to disappear. The FIA's imminent vote does not just decide a test procedure. It decides which of those futures becomes reality. And when that decision lands, we will finally see whether Mercedes built the strongest engine of the new era. Or whether they built the most fragile advantage in modern Formula One history.